All right, let's talk about eating disorders. They're often misunderstood, so in this explainer, we're going to move past the headlines and build a really deep, clinical understanding. My goal is to give you a clear, solid framework you can use to really get how these complex conditions are diagnosed, what might cause them, and importantly, how they can be treated. Okay, let's dive right in. Before we even get to the clinical checklists, we have to start here with this central psychological struggle. At its very heart, an eating disorder is this profound, often agonizing disconnect between what a person sees and what is actually real. The image in the mirror is just fundamentally different from what everyone else sees. And I really want you to get this. This isn't vanity. It is a core symptom of the illness itself. This quote, wow, it gives us a really chilling look into the internal logic that can drive these disorders. It's this idea that being dangerously thin isn't a sign of sickness, but actually a mark of authenticity, of control. Understanding this kind of distorted thinking is absolutely crucial because it explains that relentless pursuit of a low body weight, even when the consequences are so obviously devastating. So, with that psychological backdrop in mind, let's build our clinical foundation. To really nail this topic, you have to be fluent in the specific diagnostic criteria from the DSM-5. We're going to walk through the three main eating disorders, and we'll start with anorexia nervosa. Okay, so the diagnosis of anorexia nervosa basically stands on three legs. First, you've got the behavior, restricting what you eat so much that it leads to a significantly low body weight. Second, you have the emotion, this intense, all-consuming fear of gaining weight. And third, there's the cognition, the thought process, a serious distortion in how they see their own body. It's the mix of all three, behavior, fear, and perception, that makes the clinical diagnosis. Now, to get even more precise, and this is important, anorexia is broken down into two subtypes. The key difference is just the method they're using to keep their weight down. In the restricting type, it's pretty much just dieting, fasting, or way too much exercise. But in the binge eating/purging type, the person is also having episodes of binge eating or purging, like making themselves vomit. Okay, let's build on that and move to our next diagnosis, bulimia nervosa. The absolute defining feature here is a destructive cycle. It starts with binge eating, eating a ton of food in a short time, and feeling totally out of control. And then that's followed by some kind of inappropriate compensatory behavior to try and prevent weight gain, like self-induced vomiting, misusing laxatives, or again, excessive exercise. And this leads us perfectly to our third major diagnosis, binge eating disorder. Now, the first part of the cycle looks identical to bulimia, that distressing binge episode. But here's the crucial difference. What happens next? In this case, nothing. The compensatory behavior is absent. That absence is the single defining feature of the disorder. So let's just nail this down, because it's a classic exam question. The bright line that separates these two disorders is the presence or absence of compensatory behaviors. Binge eating happens in both, but that cycle of purging or doing something else to undo the binge, that is unique to bulimia nervosa. Okay, so we've clearly defined the what. We know what these disorders look like. Now we have to ask the much trickier question, why? Why do these things develop? Well, the answer isn't just one thing. It's more like a complex web of risk factors, which we're going to untangle right now. To make sense of this web, it's super helpful to organize the risk factors into three big buckets: individual, sociocultural, and biological. So think of it as looking at the person themselves, the world they live in, and their own genetic blueprint. Using this framework will really help you structure your thinking. At the individual level, a huge personality trait that puts people at risk is perfectionism. And we're not just talking about wanting to do well. This is an obsessive drive for flawlessness. For someone with this trait, trying to get the perfect body can become an extension of that need for control. Food and weight become this tangible thing where perfection actually feels possible. Now let's zoom out to the sociocultural level. One of the most powerful risk factors out there is the thin ideal. You know, that constant message from media and society that being thin equals being beautiful, successful, and happy. The risk goes way up when a person doesn't just see this ideal, but they internalize it. They adopt it as their own personal goal. And this image just says it all, doesn't it? This social programming starts incredibly young. I mean, look at children's toys. The source material points out that for a real woman to have Barbie's proportions, she'd have to be over 7 feet tall and have her neck surgically extended. When that's the ideal you see from childhood, it can really set the stage for a lifetime of body dissatisfaction. But And this is so important to understand. This isn't just about society or psychology. There is a powerful biological piece to this puzzle. Family studies show a clear genetic link. Get this, if you have a close relative with anorexia, your own risk is over 11 times higher than someone in the general population. That points straight to genetics. And that genetic risk is made even more complicated by something called set point theory. The basic idea is that our bodies are kind of programmed to defend a certain weight range. It's like a thermostat. When a person diets to go way below that natural range, the body fights back. It cranks up hunger, slows down your metabolism, and makes you obsessed with food. And ironically, that biological rebellion can make binge eating even more likely. When you put all those risk factors together, the consequences become incredibly clear and incredibly serious. The toll these disorders take on both the body and the mind is just immense, which is exactly why getting the diagnosis and treatment right is so vital. Let's start with a statistic that should honestly just stop you in your tracks. For young women with anorexia nervosa, the mortality rate is 18 times higher than for their peers. That incredibly high death rate from both medical problems and suicide makes it one of the deadliest of all psychiatric disorders. And the reason it's so deadly is that starvation is a systemic assault on the body. It hits everything. We're talking about thinning hair, brittle bones, low blood pressure, major digestive problems. The heart muscle itself actually gets weaker. Electrolyte imbalances from purging can literally trigger a heart attack. Every single organ system is under siege. Now, here's something really interesting that happens over time. Diagnostic crossover. See, these diagnoses aren't always permanent, lifelong labels. It's pretty common for someone to move between disorders. For instance, you can see on the chart, someone who starts with a restricting type of anorexia might later develop binging and purging behaviors and shift to that subtype. This tells us the underlying illness can show up in different ways over time. Now, after all of that, which I know is heavy stuff, it is absolutely essential that we end on a note of hope. Because despite how severe these illnesses are, there are effective, evidence-based treatments that offer real pathways to recovery. One of the gold standard treatments, especially for bulimia and binge eating disorder, is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. It's a very logical, step-by-step approach. First, you tackle the behavior. You establish regular eating patterns to break that binge diet cycle. Then you move to the cognitive part. You learn to identify, challenge, and ultimately change those distorted beliefs about food, weight, and yourself that are fueling the whole thing. And this worksheet is a perfect example of how CBT works in the real world. It helps a patient break down an experience. You can see this situation, feeling bad about overeating. This leads to feelings like anger and these automatic dysfunctional thoughts like, you'll never make progress, so why not just eat? By actually writing it down, the patient can start to see that thought for what it is, a distortion, not a fact, and that's the first step to challenging it. So we know there is a clear path forward for individuals. Long-term studies show us that recovery isn't just possible, it's actually probable for most people. But this leaves us with a final, much larger question. We know how to treat the person, but how do we begin to treat the culture? What will it take to address the immense societal pressures that help fuel these devastating disorders in the first place?